Hi, Algebra 1. Today we are going to continue moving through Chapter 8, and we are in 8.5, which is in your books is page 500. You should have the note handout in front of you or paper and pencil. And the exciting lesson that we're going to be starting today is how to factor trinomials. It is one of my favorite math concepts to teach, which makes me extra sad that I'm not doing this in person, but we'll make the best of it. You can see on my board that there are a few things that I just felt were important to remind you. Ax squared plus bx plus c is the standard form of a trinomial. We've talked about that before many times. We talked about descending order. And when we see this a, b, and c in there, they refer to special parts of it. The a is my coefficient in front of my x squared. The b is the coefficient in front of my x. And my c is my number. That's just the same as we've been talking about for a couple weeks, writing our polynomials in descending order. Today, though, the first types of problems we're going to be dealing with are just those that have an a of 1. Our lead coefficient is just 1. Those are the easier ones to do. We'll get to the harder ones tomorrow. Actually, that turns out to be next week. Okay. So the other word that I want to define for you is the word quadratics. We use the word quadratic to refer to our trinomials that have the highest power 2, or the highest degree of 2. You might be saying, that doesn't make sense. Quad means 4. Well, remember back in the last few days when we've been taking the area of a square, we know that we're squaring each side. Where that comes from. But how many sides does a square have of equal length? 4. So the words do kind of all refer to the same concept. Okay, whenever you see quadratics, they're going to use that word in Khan Academy a good amount. When you see factor and quadratics, that's what we're doing. You're going to see that as we move forward in our own text when we move into solving quadratic equations. Okay, so on this board, I wrote two binomials, x plus 3 times x plus 7. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply them, just like we've been doing for quite a few days here in Algebra 1. And then I'm going to show you the way that we're going to think backwards through this process now. We've been spending time multiplying binomials. Well, today we're going to reverse the process and factor them. And when we say factor, it means we are going to be able to write this trinomial as a product of two factors. Two things are going to be multiplied together. Two quantities will be multiplied together. That's what we have here to start. We're going to go through the process and then I'm going to talk you through how we're going to think backwards. Okay, so we were talking about special patterns the last couple days, and the first thing I need to notice that this isn't one of those. We have not one binomial being squared, and we also do not have conjugates. So the only way to multiply these two binomials is using one of the three methods you've learned, and I'm going to continue to endorse the FOIL method. So if I go ahead and I do my firsts, my outsides, my insides, and my lasts. I have two terms being multiplied by two terms, so I know I'm going to end up with 4 terms. As you remember, my next step here is to combine like terms. So I want to show you how this 7 and this 3 are adding together to give me 10x in my cleaned up version of this trinomial. Okay, so thinking through this way, now I'm going to tell you how we're going to work backwards through this process. If I started here with this problem and said, well, I want the two factors. I know through this process that I need two numbers that add up to get me my middle term, but also multiply together to get me my third term. That is my pattern. So if I were to think backwards through that, I'd say, well, my factors of 21 are 1 and 21 and 3 and 7. There aren't too many options there. But of those two options, which ones add together to get me 10? It's not 1 and 21, it's the 3 and the 7. And so you can see how I would end up back here that x plus 3 times x plus 7 is my factored form. I'm going to go ahead and do one example. We're going to do 3 together total, but the first one we're going to take nice and slow. And you're going to see how we use those x forms that we worked on yesterday to make this process so much easier. Okay, so if you're following along in your book, I'm going to be going over problems 1, 2, and 3. And if you notice, the book breaks them down based on the signs, what operations are happening there. I'm teaching you a method where you don't need to worry about that. So the way I do it is going to look a little bit different than how they do it in the book, but if you really read carefully, you would see that the same thought process is going into it. But using an X form is the easiest way. Okay, so here's problem number 1. It says to factor x squared plus 8x plus 15. Well, I know that my end result there is to come up with 2 factors. 2 quantities that are being multiplied together. Well, to get x squared, there's only one way to do that. I know my first part of this is going to be an x. The hard part comes in where I try to figure out what goes here and here. I'm going to show you how we use these x forms. Now, your problem of the week last week was required, and you were to just figure out the pattern and then apply it a few times. Then yesterday we took a break from regular algebra, and actually not yesterday, Wednesday, before we took our quiz. And you just did good old-fashioned math, and you filled out a page full of X forms that had different compartments missing. So you were just doing the math and getting into the habit of being able to fill this out. You're going to see today why we've been doing that. Now, remember, standard form. Here's my A, and in these problems, A is 1. Here's my B, and here's my C. When I went over how to solve these X forms, I used some words very strategically. In this X, the top part is my ceiling. Makes sense? But the reason we use the word ceiling is so that we remember that my C term goes there. So I'm going to put my C term in the top of this X. I also strategically and intentionally use the word basement for that bottom part of the X, because basement is where my B number goes. So now I have this X form with 2 pieces filled in. And you spent time yesterday thinking through all these different combinations. And you did problems just like this, where if I give you 2, you should be able to give me the other 2. So what is really being asked here? It tells me, based on what you know the pattern to already be, I need 2 numbers that multiply together to get me 15, but add together to give me 8. Well, my factors of 15 are 1 and 15, and 3 and 5. Again, a pretty easy one to start with. Of those 2 possible combinations, only one combination gets me 8 when I add them. And so I get 5 and 3. That tells me that the second part of my binomial over here, the first one's 5 and the second one is 3. You might be asking, well, wait a minute, I did 3 and 5. Does that matter? Well, look at it. What if we wrote x plus 3 times x plus 5? I'd get the same exact thing. Why is that? Because multiplication is commutative. The order does not matter between the 2 binomials. Doesn't matter if this one's first or this one's first. Okay, so how would we check this? I would check this by foiling it and double checking that what I end up with is the same thing I started with. X squared plus 5x plus 3x plus 15. Okay, there's another shortcut or clue that I want to point out to you. Whenever we look at our original trinomial, this sign right here, if it's positive or at at addition, it means my signs in my factors are going to be the same. And then my first one tells me that they're both addition. So the actual signs do matter. Now, you could go this way and say, okay, I know my first are going to be x. This tells me that both signs are the same and they're both addition. And you could fill in the addition sign there. And then you could think through the math or the FOIL method backwards and say, well, 5 times 3 gives me 15 and 5 plus 3 gives me 8. Or you could just rely 100% on your x form to get you your signs too. Either way is fine. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and erase this and start over for our problem number 2. And we're going to do the same thing. This time I'm going to go a little bit faster now that I've shown you how to use the x form in our factoring of trinomials. So problem 2 is x squared minus 11x plus 24. Okay, now by definition, when they ask me to factor it, it tells me, all right, I need 2 quantities, 2 binomials. I know it's going to be x and x. The only way I can get x squared. So I fill in my x form. What do I know? My c goes in the ceiling. My b goes in my basement. Notice I have to take the signs with it. So this one is positive 24. This one is negative 11. Now I'm ready to just do the math that we worked on with our x form worksheet this week. What 2 numbers go here? Add to get me negative 11, but multiply to get me 24. Well, the factors of 24, we have a few more options to work with in this case. 1 and 24, nope. 2 and 12, close, but not right. 3 and 8, and 6 and 4. Well, of those 2, 3 and 8 look like it's about right here. But to get a negative 11, that means I need a negative 3 and a negative 8. So my signs do matter. I double check my x form. Negative 3 times negative 8 gives me positive 24, so it still works. And they add to get me negative 11. So that means one of my binomials is x minus 3, and x minus 8 is the other one. Again, I could FOIL this, and I should every time. I should be getting good at the FOIL method to be able to do it mentally to make sure I end up here. I can also switch the order. It can be x minus 8 times x minus 3 because multiplication is commutative. Well, let me show you the shortcut with the signs in this case. Again, this second sign tells me they're the same when it's addition. The first sign tells me what they are. So that tells me they're both subtraction, which, again, if I just rely on the x form, I get that information there too. Okay, let's dive into the third practice problem, or problem that we're going to do together. That is problem 3 in this lesson, 8-5. And hopefully now you're starting to feel a little bit more comfortable in this method to factor trinomials. And hopefully now you're also seeing why I spent all that time with the x form. Okay, this problem says factor x squared plus 2x minus 15. I know I'm going to end up with 2 quantities being multiplied together. X is going to be my first term. My c goes in my ceiling. My b goes in my basement. So now I need to think, what 2 numbers go here that multiply to get me negative 15 and add together to get me 2? Well, when I think through the factors of 15, 1 and 15 and 3 and 5. Well, I know 1 and 15 aren't it, because if I add them, and no matter what sign combination I use, I'm not going to get 2. So I know I have 5 and 3 in one way or another. But if this number is negative, I know one of these has to be negative. The only way that I will get positive 2 when I add them is by using -3. So I know I have x plus 5 and x minus 3 here. If I factor or FOIL that in my head, I confirm that this is where I started. The shortcut method that applies here again with my signs, this time my second sign here, when it's subtraction, it tells me that my operations are different in my answer, which is revealed here that we found anyways doing our X forms. Okay, I'm going to pause the video and clean off my board and write, or I'm not gonna pause the video, you are gonna pause the video to try the 3 practice problems here. And they are taken from the different got it problems in this section. I'm gonna write them really quickly here. Let's see if I can fit all 3. And you should be using the X form method if you cannot do these just mentally. Some of us will be able to start seeing that pattern and get really good at solving these in our head. Some of us will need to rely on the X form method. It doesn't matter. Use it if you need it. So go ahead and pause it if you haven't already. Try these 3 problems, and then we're gonna just go over the answers really quickly. Okay, I'm just gonna write out the answers. This is my answer for the first one. 3 plus 8 gives me 11. 3 times 8 gives me 24. Remember, the order of the quantities doesn't matter because multiplication is commutative. In my second one, I have a negative sign there. So I have to be extra careful with my signs, using either my shortcut method with my signs or my X form or both. My answer here is y minus 4 times y minus 2. -4 plus -2 gives me -6, but multiplied together gives me +8. This last one, a different organization of signs just to give us different practice. And if I do this one, I would get 7, or C plus 7 and C minus 3. Because 7 minus 3 gives me, oh, I did that wrong. I wrote them down wrong. See, I double checked it and thought, oops, wrong signs. Now it's right. -7 plus 3 is -4. And when I multiply them together, I get -21. Okay, so now you can see why I spent all the time working on the X forms. And it's going to be even extra helpful as we move into harder trinomials to factor. But today's lesson is just starting with the easiest, most basic ways. So you have some suggested book problems there listed in the note handout, as well as on RenWeb. And you have one Khan Academy assignment that corresponds here. We had our quiz yesterday. If you're following along chronologically by day here, we have a quiz on Thursday. And if you are working ahead, that means we will have a quiz on Thursday. Okay, so that's it for this week's lessons on YouTube. Hope you have a great weekend.